Hey, Enrique, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about sharks, flat sharks, and everything that involves sharks? Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Right on. Love it.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Beyond Jaws podcast, where today we have an absolute legend in the field, Dr. Enrique Cortes. Enrique was until recently a senior research scientist at NOAA Fisheries at the Panama City lab, where he led the stock assessment analysis mostly for Atlantic sharks. His research into stock assessments specializing in sharks is well known and legendary in the field. He's also conducted research on life history theories, demographic modeling, quantitative conservation and fisheries techniques, feeding ecology, and stock assessment methods, including the application of methods more suitable for data-poor situations, which are for many of the sharks. He has advised 30 graduate students, both PhD and masters, and has collaborated and advised with governments and collaborators with colleagues from over a dozen countries. Enrique served as the chair of the ICAT, which is the International Commission for Conservation of Atlantic Tunas Shark Species Group, and has been a member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group, and is an invited expert and reviewer and contributor to various shark-related activities at the Tuna Regional Fisheries Management Organizations and other national and international organizations such as CITES and FAO. He's a prolific publisher and journal reviewer and has given over 100 oral presentations at various conferences such as the American Lazo Brink Society and the American Fisheries Society. Enrique earned his bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Barcelona in Spain, after which he received a Fulbright scholarship to attend the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. After that, he returned to Spain, University of Barcelona, and obtained his PhD in animal biology. And Enrique has just recently retired from NOAA Fisheries. Congratulations, Enrique. And he's currently an adjunct professor at Florida State University's Coastal and Marine Laboratory. Enrique, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you for the very extreme accolades that you gave me.
We're really excited to have you here, especially now you've just retired. We'll start off with ask you the first question we typically ask our guests is, how did you first get interested in sharks and the marine environment in general?
So both my parents and grandparents were marine biologists. No, I'm just kidding. They had nothing to do with that. No. So
I thought it was. I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Wow.
No, so I grew up in Barcelona, Spain, and so we are on the Mediterranean. And when I was in undergraduate school, we had a dive club that I was affiliated with, and so that's scuba dive club. So that's how my interest started. I started getting interested in mostly in the marine environment and sharks specifically, although there weren't many in the Mediterranean even back then. We're talking about the mid-70s. So that's really how I got into it. And then the rest is history.
So you're a little bit of a late bloomer in that you didn't really get interested until you were in college, university, when you started scuba diving?
Yeah, I mean, I like to do, aquatic related things, but I was not really, in fact, I was not sure if I was going to go into biology. Initially, I thought I was going to go into veterinary science. But back then, it was for us very far. It was 300 kilometers away, which is only like 140 miles or less. And so for us, it was like a big thing. So anyway, I ended up going into biology, and that's what I did back in 1976.
Okay. So then, that's not really that long ago, since I think you and I are the same age. So that's really just was yesterday for us. Yeah. So you decided to do biology, but from a lot of it had to do from when you started doing some diving and stuff. But did you have any like direction what you thought you might do, or while you were in college when you just kind of got interested in the marine sciences?
No. So what I was doing was biology, right? So it was mostly terrestrial biology, we had ecology, but it was thanks to this group that they had like a little biology section
Mm.
at the scuba club, and we were doing some sort of extracurricular activities, and that's what really piqued my interest in the marine environment. But I must say that back in those days, we had very little guidance as to what our career opportunities could be, especially in Spain. And so we were like little lemmings going out and out of the cliff, once we finished school. So we really had to fend for ourselves to continue. So that's one of the reasons why I ended up leaving Spain and coming to the U.S.
Did you, when you were done, when you were finished with your schooling and everything, and you're ready to start that career, did you find, like you said, you were kind of lost in terms of what to do? Did you want to find a job right after? Was that the goal, was to look for something within that biology sort of field?
So just a reality check. Back then, even now, to get a job in the biology field in Spain with only a bachelor's degree is close to impossible. So you knew that if you wanted, so many of my counterparts in the same cohort as I was ended up getting out of the field of biology altogether. I have many friends who had to go do something else. So the only opportunity was to continue on to graduate studies, right? Which you could do in Spain. I did like a mini master's there, but it was always, to have opportunities, especially working with sharks, you had to leave the country. And the United States was obviously a big attractant. So as soon as I finished, I had an interim phase between when I finished my bachelor's and before I came to the States, because back then in Spain we had mandatory military service. So I had to spend, but because we were students, I had to spend a total of about 15 months, but divided into 3 years, right?
Okay.
But it was mandatory, so you couldn't do anything. You couldn't go anywhere.
So did you just do it, do people normally just do it on their summer months? Is that it, when they're off school?
Well, yeah, it was summer and then more than summer. It was like 6 months together. So, but anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up just applying for a scholarship, and I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright scholarship back then. And in 1984, I was able to come to the States to do a master's degree with Sonny Gruber, who was one of the most well-known researchers in the field.
Did you know when you applied with this Fulbright that you were going to go to do sharks and to work with Sonny, or was it how'd that come about?
Well, so I had to apply to a number of places, and I also applied with somebody you know very well, Greg Caillet. Great mentor, colleague, and friend of ours. Yep. But I ended up I forget exactly the reason, if it was some timing issue, but I ended up going with Sonny Gruber. And I had visited before. I had actually visited several of the different labs that I was contemplating going to, but I ended up going to Miami to the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science.
Cool. Very nice.
Oh, cool. Now, you worked out, but you spent probably a lot of time out at Bimini looking at lemon sharks?
Yeah, so those were the good days of my life, I call them, when we got to do field work. So my research was in the Florida Keys and in Bimini. Oh, okay. And at the time I was doing feeding ecology. And so, I spent a lot of time in the Florida Keys, especially the lower Florida Keys, and Bimini. In Bimini, we'd go to Bimini on cruises and do our research while we were there.
Now you had a bit of a colorful group of people there. Wasn't John Morrissey there about the same time?
Yes. So we were the last batch of formal Gruber students. So we had, back when I was there, when I started in '84, we had Craig Brown, who later went on to become a NOAA employee too, and Alan Henningsen, who sadly died a few years ago.
Yep.
Great guy, by the way.
Yep.
And they were the two students, and then I came aboard. Shortly afterwards came Brad Weatherby, very good
Brad,
friend
yep.
and colleague, and a little later on came John Morrissey, who obviously we all know and love, great character as well. But we were the last batch of formal graduate students at Rasmus, because then Sonny Gruber moved his operation to Bimini, and then he had a lot of international students and people from different universities, but they were not, affiliated with Rasmus. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I knew you had. I forgot about Brad Weatherby and Alan. As you mentioned, Alan's was a really nice guy. Sadly, he passed away here recently, or a couple of years ago now. But he was a super nice guy. I forgot about some of those other people there, and of course, Big John.
Yeah.
So you guys were working on doing the research there, and you went ahead and spent your time working with did your master's with Sonny, and then after that you went back to Spain at that point?
Yes, I went back to Spain in '87 and worked on my PhD there on expanding a little bit on what I had done, but still in the feeding ecology field. And I got my PhD in '91. And then I took a 1-year hiatus doing something else before I came back to the States.
When you're doing your PhD, did you work on sharks for PhD, or how, as part of your PhD?
Yeah. It was the same.
Okay.
Same general field. Yeah.
Okay, and you worked with Sonny involved with that as well? Yeah.
He was part of my committee as well. Exactly.
Okay.
Even though my degree was in, more animal biology, so the courses that I had were not specifically marine biology, but were more ecology and so more general courses. But since I had a lot of data already from my master's, I ended up expanding what I had done for my master's for my PhD.
Okay.
And then after that, I took a little side trip. If you want, I can tell you about it.
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah, so back in '91, it's an interesting story. Most people don't know about it, but I almost became an astronaut with the European Space Agency.
What?
That's
awesome.
I did know this, but go ahead.
Oh, you did know? Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened was, there was a flyer at the university actually, and I applied half jokingly, right? But I ended up, so this whole process lasted like a year and a half or so. But I ended up being selected in Spain. I was like the oddball, because I was a marine biologist, right? All the other guys were military or engineers. They were fighter jet. But there was 5 of us who got selected in the end. But they were test pilots or fighter jet pilots, or the guy who eventually got selected for the European Space Agency, who was already working at that outfit at the ESA. But so anyway, I kept passing tests and stuff. I was kind of an oddball, but I was the only one who was a scuba diver, and at the time I was also a skydiver. So I was kind of I had a strange profile, but so they liked it, and I kept going on and passing tests. And so back in '91, we got selected, the 5 of us in Spain. And in theory, so then we went to a European selection, which consisted of 65 people from 13 different countries that made up the European Space Agency. Some of them were already astronauts that were flying for other countries like France or Germany. But anyway, to make a long story short, at the end of the day, they only ended up picking up 6 people, one from each of the countries that contributed the most money, right, to the European Space Agency. So I didn't make it, but I made it all the way to the round of 20. And it was very interesting because I had to go through a bunch of different tests and things that I will not forget easily. The other thing was that we were unfortunate because we were going to go train with the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union. But remember what happened in 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed. So we never got to go training. Anyway, so that's the story. And then when I finished that in '92, oh, by the way, yes, I had married my wife in '91, and the day after my wedding, I had to leave for Paris to be centrifuged because I was in the, test of the European Space Agency. I had to leave for Paris and get centrifuged.
That was your honeymoon on your own.
Yeah, so that was.
How's it? And you're still married, right?
How's that experience?
Yeah, we went on a honeymoon later. But that was an interesting thing, yeah. So anyway, then I came. So I applied for some postdoctoral fellowships and ended up coming back because I failed to mention that initially I had wanted to stay in the States after I finished my master's, but because we had a Fulbright scholarship, they made us go back. We had a 2-year requirement to go back so that you wouldn't just leave, after the country had put some money into you.
Right.
That didn't work so well for them eventually because I ended up leaving anyway later. And actually I got another scholarship from the Spanish government and then the Catalan government because I am actually Catalonian. I'm from northeastern Spain, so I speak Catalan from Barcelona. And so I got those scholarships, and back in '92 I ended up going back, and then I went to Bone Marine Laboratory at the Center for Shark Research with Bob Cuter, and I was there for 5 years, from '92 to '97.
Okay.
Very nice.
So when you were doing the, I got to ask this question: if you would have gotten selected to be the representative for the space program, would you have gone in that direction?
Absolutely. You don't say no to that. It's an offer you cannot refuse. The guy who got selected actually became friends with him, and later on he became the secretary of the equivalent of the secretary of science for Spain.
Wow.
Wow.
But anyway, and he flew with a couple of things. Funny story is that I got to know, I don't want to extend myself too much, but because we were, sort of celebrities in Spain back in the day, I got to go to a couple of programs where I had met, the first American astronaut in space, his name escapes me now. And then I met Buzz Aldrin later at a program that we had later on to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the men stepping on the
walking
moon.
On the moon.
So anyway, that's my little side story.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
That's just a little side story.
Yeah. Oh man, that's great. Now, one thing we've had a number of guests on there, and you know this, but because you went from one country to another country, in this case from Spain to the U.S., and you eventually settled here. And other people have gone and either studied and gone back, or they've settled in other countries. What was that like when you made the move to come here to the U.S. and you decided, I'm going to pursue my career here? What was that? How was that as far as a decision to make? And is your wife Spanish? I've never met your wife. She's,
no,
she's also
she
Spanish.
is American.
She is American.
She's-
Okay.
she's
okay.
American. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess
Yeah,
that had
she's
to have a
from
little
the
bit of an.
Boston area.
Oh, okay. From Boston. Okay. So that had to be a little
Yeah.
bit of an influence for you to come back to Florida.
Yeah, so that's also an interesting story because we met just like weeks before I had to go back to Spain in 1987. So we had a long distance relationship for like 3 years. We kept going back and forth. But to me, it was very rough at the beginning because when you go to another country and it's like a completely different experience, right? And you go back
Mhm.
to your country like I did, you feel like you don't belong in one place or the other. So it's hard to get acclimated to both places. Then I went back to the States, right? And then I really got really, very used to it. But going back to Spain, it's even now it feels strange because, I'm so Americanized. But interestingly, I get used to, like in Spain, we have dinner very late at night, right?
Right.
Like 9, 10.
Yeah.
So I immediately get used to that. And of course, to drinking wine and eating good food all the time. But yeah, it's rough to make the, to get used, to make the transition from one country, one continent to the other, because it's, after all, everything is different, right? The culture and everything. But I like to describe myself in the past as a scientific exile, because the chances that the U.S. afforded me were so much more than in Spain, especially back then.
Did you have trouble when you did you have trouble thinking about staying away from what you were comfortable with in Spain and trying to find a job in there to start looking after and doing conservation within your own home country? Or was it something like you went to the U.S. and you saw there's just so many more opportunities here?
Yeah, the last thing you said.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really a no-brainer because, as I was saying at the beginning, it was really hard to get. It was very hard to get a university position in Spain because there were many people and there were very few positions, and maybe many people who had good resumes, who had been there for a long time and were sort of on queue, waiting for an opportunity. And there were very few non-academic positions, government as well. So it was a very, very limited field to get a job at. And things have gotten better, especially with the European Union, because there is more personnel mobility, but it's not the same. Even the pay is not comparable to what it is in the States. So
Yeah.
that's one good thing that the States has to be proud of in terms of affording more opportunities to scientists in general. And I speak mostly from the Spanish perspective. It's a little different in other countries where they do better than Spain.
Yeah.
But
How much of a difference was it? Notably, like you couldn't survive off of a lot of the salaries that you saw in Spain or that you knew about in Spain?
Well, you couldn't survive because you couldn't get a job. And if you got a job, you could get a decent salary for Spain, but the salary difference between even academics or government scientists between Spain and the US is very large.
Right.
And we think they pay pretty crappy here too. So, but it puts in
Well, I
perspective
know it
being
depends
from
on
it.
being in academia and and I realize that maybe I'm a little biased having been in the government, but generally speaking, there are still some differences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Now, when you first came here, did you speak? Obviously, you speak very good English. Did you have any problems with the language barrier when you first came?
No. So actually, English was my. I don't want to load, but English was my fifth language because I spoke.
Wow.
Your fifth language.
I went to I spoke French because I went to a French school starting at age but I was in Spain, so I spoke Spanish, and I'm Catalan, so I spoke Catalan. And then I started learning Russian at an early age, because my sister was a ballet dancer, so I took lessons with her teacher's mother. So I started with Russian, and actually, back in the day, I was also considering going to the Soviet Union for studying, because that was an opportunity back then. But obviously, things didn't go very well for the Soviet Union, as we can see today, right?
Yeah.
But so English I started when I was about 12 years old, and we were taking it in school. It was more like British English. So at the beginning it was a little rough, you know. I think I heard your previous guest talking about her, I think it was Joanna, who was talking about
yeah.
a teacher that she had. When we were graduate student at Erasmus, we had a professor who may still be there, I won't say his name, who had a really thick Texas accent. So all the the graduate students, foreign graduate students, we had a really hard time understanding him. But obviously I've had like 40 years here now. Yeah, so it's it's.
I live in Canada, and when I go down to Texas, I still have trouble sometimes with some of the words. So I wouldn't feel too bad about that.
Yeah. Depends where you are. The different well, you even like within Spain, you say you speak Catalonia, which I'm sure not everybody in Spain speaks that. So it's almost if you live in different parts of the country, you have different. Is it a dialect or is it actually a distinct language? I'm just curious.
No, there are 4 languages in Spain: Spanish, Catalan, there is Basque, and Galician, which is very close to Portuguese. And they are all Romance languages. They all come from Latin. And actually, the Spanish one is the most derived ones. So for us, Catalans, for example, it's easier to learn French than for Spanish people because we have more in common. And for example, I've never studied Portuguese or Italian. Well, now I'm studying through Duolingo, but it's very easy for me to pick it up because it has a lot of commonalities, And I took Latin in school. Back in the day, we had Latin. So
a lot of the pronunciations are already there.
And a lot of the words have the same root, so it's much easier. It's like a computer language. Once you know one, it's easier to know another one. So.
So where did the interest in learning these languages come from? Like, is that something you've just always been interested in? Because, I understand learning a little bit of the 4 languages in Spain, but still a lot of languages to learn and to be able to hold a conversation in that. Now you're saying Italian, French, and so forth. Like, where did the interest come from?
Well, part of it, as you say, it's just being there because of the proximity. It's very easy to learn other languages. So it's not uncommon, right, for people to speak multiple languages. But I was interested in because of the French thing, me being in school, and different things that I also took German in the university. So I was always interested in languages, and I actually worked also during some time as a translator for a couple of languages to make some bucks when I was doing my PhD in Spain.
Gotcha.
So, I tell people, languages have never hurt me. It's always a good thing to have. I tell my daughter that. It's always a good thing to have some languages in your pocket. They will never hurt you.
How many languages does your daughter speak now?
She's up to 4 now because she's doing a minor in Italian at UF, and she speaks Spanish and Catalan and English, of course. So.
Okay.
Good for her.
All right. Well, that's awesome. I struggle enough with the English language. Some other languages would be awesome to know.
It's a proximity thing, really, and it's contagious. Once you know one, it's easy to know another one. So.
Right.
Yeah. So when you you worked at Mote Marine Lab for a number of years there, and then you eventually went on with NOAA Fisheries, and so could you talk a little bit about that? Just kind of how you went from one to the other, and kind of a little bit of.
So at Mote Marine Laboratory, I did like a couple of postdocs, and again, I got funding most of the time from the Spanish government, then the Catalan government, and then some from MODE itself. And so I used that time to really retool myself with a lot of the work that I would do later, because I had the base, right? I had a pretty good quantitative base, but I had to hone my skills in different areas. Go beyond population dynamics and other things that some of which I had taken in school. And so I used all that time to really hone my skills, and then become more attractive to be hired down the line. Back then, I was still contemplating the possibility of going back to Spain, and I forget now exactly, but I think I may have applied for something in Spain, which I didn't get, but I didn't put much emphasis on it. And because I was married, and I became a U.S. citizen, I should say, back in '96. And that's why I was then able to apply for a federal job. And I got that federal job back in 1998, and I was hired. Well, first of all, I should say, had 1 year where I was at Florida State University, but I was stationed already in Panama City. And after that, I was already hired to become, because they didn't have anybody who was doing stock assessment for sharks. So there was a need for that, that niche, that was free there. So I took the opportunity, and they hired me back in '98.
Okay. And so,
to work for the government is always to work for the government, like for NOAA, is always an interesting thing. What attracted you to get to NOAA specifically? Was it the work being done, or you just apply and kind of hope for the best that you got something that you liked?
Well, it was getting a job, first of all. That was good, getting a federal job, to be honest. But it looked attractive because I had the opportunity to sort of build a little program there, and then, well, I got into the wonderful world, in quotes, of stock assessment, right? But I was able to do with, because the thing with the government, it's very uneven, we've had colleagues who have had the chance to do much more research than others, but the type of work I was doing, which is stock assessment, was non-stop, essentially, right? We call it the stock assessment treadmill. And it only got worse through the years because, as you know very well, sharks became more and more important. We had continuous stock assessment, right, which is what we do to assess the status of shark stocks. And it's a very long process and very involved process. Excuse me. And so that took, that became increasingly more and more, it took more and more time to do those stock assessments through the years. And we had increasingly less time to dedicate to research. By research, I don't mean necessarily field research. I mean even desk research, modeling, things of that nature.
Yeah. No. One of the first really significant papers I remember you did was on the you calculated trophic levels in feeding in sharks. I think it came out in 1999 and stuff, which was I think still pretty much of a classic paper on that. And you'd done to that point you'd done it seemed like a lot of feeding ecology type of research, and then you seemed to go more towards the demographic stuff from there. And was that more of a NOAA decision to go in that direction?
No, so essentially the feeding ecology work was for my graduate work, right? And I was interested in methods, and that's why I did the methods paper and then the trophic level. Then after that, while I was at Mode, that's when I started getting interested too in demographic analysis, right? Just Leslie matrices, life tables, that sort of stuff. That, by the way, I have to say here, so that people know, because people have a tendency to forget things. Greg Caillet was one of the pioneers, if not, with Sonny Gruber did a little bit too. But anyway, in sharks to apply those methods.
Yeah.
And so that was, he was one of the great mentors that we had to get into that field, and that got me inspired. And so demographics became one of the things, and then it led to stock assessment, other quantitative methods, and then that led me to, in fact, by doing some of that work, to start putting pressure in NOAA to incorporate some of those methods into stock assessments, right? So in a way, that helped me to get my job in a way, right? Because I was proposing. Again, it was a pretty open field back in the day, especially for NOAA in the Southeast Center, where we didn't have anybody who did shark stock assessments.
And so a lot of the stuff you did, really, you got into like kind of leading the way and doing a lot of the assessments and a lot of the coastal Atlantic sharks, and some of the pelagic sharks. Pretty much, is that where it kind of your trajectory kind of took you to?
Yeah. So we had two things. So the main thing, what I call our day job, was to do domestic stock assessments. Keep in mind that we did the assessments for all the sharks on the east coast of the United States, including the Gulf of Mexico. And by the time I finished, there were like 42 stocks, right? As I used to say, 1.5, 2 people, 42 stocks, because that's how many people we had to assess all those stocks.
Right.
And we had a process that was very lengthy. And later on, I got more help. We had a team of 3, but that's something that people have to keep in mind, that we were limited by the amount of work we could do, especially within the parameters of what stock assessments are, which are, as you probably know, especially on the East Coast, it's a process that's very lengthy. It takes a minimum of a year. We've had some that have lasted 3 years. Yes, 3 years. So it's the process that's in place because there is increasing level of scrutiny by the industry, by the conservationists. We are in the middle. We have to do the best we can with the data we have. So it's a process, like I said, that's become very, very lengthy. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I was answering you had asked me something.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of curious. I guess looking back now, I mean, I guess I'm trying to ask you, looking back now and having done that started that process years ago. What's your?
Oh yeah.
Did you feel it made a difference? I guess, do you think, in terms of with policies, shark fisheries policy management, that type of kind of looking over, looking back now.
I'd like to think so, right? NOAA had a thing that they called the 30 years of successful management, because what's happened with the domestic stocks is that we assessed, right? Because without assessments, there is no management. So with the work that we did, what we were able to see is that the majority of those stocks that were large coastal sharks, essentially, your typical sandbars, duskies, and others for which we did assessments, that they have been depleted, but that they are rebounding very slowly, but they are rebounding. Also, some of the demographic work that we had done put in place things like minimum sizes, what segments of the population are more vulnerable to exploitation. So yes, I like to think that a lot of what we've done has been helpful. Then there is the international arena, ICAT.
Oh yeah.
That's the entire
Mm-hmm.
Atlantic. So that deals with pelagic sharks. And a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
work we did later on ecological risk assessments and other work, a lot of this led to management measures that were implemented by ICAT, in addition to the stock
Okay.
assessments that we did. For example, for blue
Mhm.
shark, shorefin mako, and poor beagle, which are the only three species that have been formally assessed
Mhm.
with formal assessment methods at ICAT.
What's been your because you and I kind of came from what I always refer to like as the Jaws generation. We kind of started out our careers in the 80s and stuff, and sort of looking back now over the last 30, 40 years now, how would you compare, like, say, when starting out, and you kind of used the comment on how back then it was kind of wide open as far as you see the field, like from when you started to like now. Do you have any thoughts over the last, where you saw the field was when you started to now?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. As I'm sure you know, I mean, it's changed so much. There is so much more interest in sharks, so much more scrutiny too in what is done, so many more people. One thing that I always say, and that I like to say in stock assessment, right? Because before we didn't really have the methods, so to speak, to assess shark populations, right? But those methods have become available, and there are many of the so-called data poor methods that can be applied. But what I like to say is that let's not forget the data. We cannot forget to keep investing in data, especially nowadays, because there are many techniques, of course, with machine learning, AI, management strategy evaluation, simulation. You can do a lot of cool stuff with lots of cool statistics and graphics, but hey, at the end of the day, you need real data, right? Like you have identified many different species. It's let's start the house by the foundation. Let's get some
Yep.
real basic data, because otherwise, garbage in, garbage out, and it can be all wrapped in very fancy stuff. But if you don't have, you have to know your data before you put it in any models. Otherwise, it's very dangerous.
When you look at stock assessment data, in Canada we had a problem in the mid 2010s where the government took a sort of a back seat to stock assessment, almost stopped or reduced the amount of stock assessment data that's put into place. I'm not sure if that's happened in the States, but when we talk about data monitoring, like stock assessments and how important it is, but then you get funding changes as you move along. Sometimes funding for stock assessments or any kind of long-term data monitoring goes up and goes down depending on the government that's involved, depending on the time, what we're involved in, inflation, no inflation, recession, no recession. You talk about how important these data monitoring programs are. What are your thoughts on, sometimes the funding just kind of varies throughout the years, and sometimes you get really great data, and then sometimes you don't get great data at all, if you get any data.
Well,
Do you have any thoughts on just sort of, just on that fluctuation?
yeah, and we don't see necessarily that fluctuation, because if you think, and the U.S. is a case where, even though with sharks we are data poor, in general the U.S. has a lot of data, right? So think, for example, what are the main sources of data that we use in stock assessments? In the best case scenario, we have catches, right, which are landings, and there are lots of programs that exist in the U.S., and that's almost a census. So that information is very good. The bycatch information is another beast, because these are estimates, and those estimates rely on level of coverage, for example, of observer programs, where what you were mentioning, Andrew, is exactly the case. It can vary, and you can have,
Right.
discontinuities or different levels of coverage, right? Then you have indices of abundance, which come from different programs, which can be either fishery dependent, for example, from observer programs, or fishery independent from surveys run by academics or state partners, or even by NOAA with our cruises, right? What we call fishery independent, because fishermen are not involved. And those can also be affected by funding. Good example is, for example, the Northeast. Dave, you mentioned Lisa and Attention earlier, and their survey was, restricted to every 2 or 3 years because of
Right.
they didn't have the funding. And then you have other sources of information of data that are needed, like length composition, length of the animals, right? That are also dependent on some of these programs that are subject to funding. And then the fourth one is biological information, and that's where we are in worse shape in terms of a nationwide data collection for sharks, because while for other species they collect a lot of biological data, for example through recreational surveys, for sharks it's extremely limited. So we have to rely on other data sources from academic partners or from our own research, where we get, say, vertebrate to conduct age and growth studies, or gonads for reproductive studies, right? So that kind of basic information is still very needed, because, and Dave, you'll agree with me, I mean, and for sharks, actually, this is what we know the best, right? And I say sharks because I work on sharks. I don't work on batoids, so I've always worked on sharks.
Right.
But it's the same story. So the thing that we know the most about, right, is probably reproduction, right? Reproduction, because we can count the litter sizes. But boy, do we have a lot of uncertainty in the frequency of breeding, for example, right? There is so much uncertainty in the age and growth. Do they stop depositing rings? How long do they live? Right? All these. What is natural mortality? The big elephant in the room, that we obtain through indirect methods. So these things are like extremely important. So we have to dedicate money to it, because essentially that's what goes into any kind of assessment, stock assessment, anything. And it's extremely important to have that information. So we have to keep investing in data collection. That's kind of my mantra, The other stuff is there. The modeling part is there.
Yeah.
Well, I think also too, the people don't often realize that sharks are, you got to look at it from a reproductive standpoint. It's more of a mammalian system than it is a fish system. And I know a lot of times they'll look at like rockfish, salmon, something like that, a bony fish, and they'll try to manage a shark the same way, and you can't. You got to think about it completely differently. And I think that, and a lot of times with a lot of the fisheries people, if they don't have any experience working on sharks, they'll just like see it and just kind of assume it's use some of the parameters they do as they would with a bony fish. But it's really, you got to look at it very differently than that. You get more as a mammal type of thing than as a bony fish. And I think that's where a lot of the problems go.
But keeping in mind too, as you know very well, the great diversity that there is in life histories and even in reproductive output, that makes a difference in terms of their vulnerability. So one size does not fit all is the other message. Even though as a group they are more vulnerable than telios in general.
So I have to ask you a question from left field. And this could be a really important question to our audience out there, especially the younger people, if they're ever considering to do this and to do this activity. And this is from a conversation you and I had many years ago. So if some of our younger audience members decide they want to go to Spain and go running with the bulls in Pamplona, what advice would you have for them?
Probably don't do it.
I was just about to say that. Just don't do it.
Yeah, so you cannot go by yourself. I mean, I would seek advice because they have different groups there that they call them cuadrillas that do. So talk to them because they have techniques. You don't want to get gored. Like, for example, there's been a number of our good Australian friends that have been they're pretty wild and they start running there. So it's dangerous stuff. So I haven't done it myself. And keep in mind that people are there drunk for an entire week, and then they run with the bull. So
and then they run.
They run with the
Do you think that's where they get the? Do you think that's where they get the bright ideas after the drink? Like, hey, you know what we should do? We should go running with the bulls.
I think that's a little part of it, at least. Yeah.
As I recall, you told me.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just so everybody knows it. When Enrique told me this story originally years ago, we were sitting in a bar having a beer when he was telling me this story. We were not in Spain, thankfully. But he said, "What? I think he told me something like good advice if you're going to be drunk enough to go do it. Like look for the local people because they're the ones standing in the doorway." Away from so the bulls don't gore them, and it's all the tourists and the foreigners that are actually trying to run in front. Is that correct? Is that?
Well, no, they run, but they have they have their techniques, and they have a newspaper that they use to keep the distance from the bull. I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but
wait, they roll up a newspaper and just like knock them on the head like
they
bad
go
bull,
like push them out, I guess.
Oh, how bad are some of those injuries though? Like people must get really injured though, right?
Yeah, they can because I mean, if you look at the some of the shots of what they do, I mean, it's in narrow streets. But the most dangerous part is when they go into the bull ring because it's sort of like
narrows up.
Yeah, it narrows down and there's less space.
Yeah. Oh, crazy.
Well, good advice. Good advice here.
Never done it?
No. I was there once, but I didn't run. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You just watched. Yeah. Just a little extra we throw you on the Beyond Jaws podcast. If you happen to be a young person who happens to find yourself in Pamplona and drunk, you may not want to. That bright idea to run with them may not be the best idea to have. So, well, so now that you're retired, what are your plans now that you're retired? What are you planning? What's your plans to do? What do you plan to do now?
So I'm, as I told you, I became affiliated with FSU. That to have an affiliation, maybe finish up some work, maybe come back to some of the stuff I had done on life history that I never got a chance to retake, update things. But mostly I want to have some fun, maybe I'll do a couple of consultancies to make a little money for a little bit. But essentially, I want to do what I want if I'm going to work. Or maybe I decide...
You have to choose.
Yeah, maybe I decide I just want to go play tennis for the rest of my life or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But initially I want to at least... It's hard to let go completely.
Yeah.
And actually, I didn't mention this, but the last year I was at NOAA, I was doing a thing that's called phase retirement, where I was only working part-time, and I was supposed to be mentoring employees and sort of passing the institutional knowledge that, for better or worse, I accumulated for the past 25 years in terms.
How did you like that program? Did you find it rewarding from a mentor point of view?
I must be honest, and it's unfortunately, I mean, I was able to do the transfer of the institutional knowledge, and with some of my colleagues who worked in my group who hadn't been there so many years. So that part was good, but the program is really designed to sort of to mentor newer employees, right? But because there was no newer employee, I couldn't do that. So that was a little frustrating. But of course,
Yeah.
you always have the funding issues and in the government.
Yeah.
But I'd rather not talk about it because
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
I've just never heard of a program like that. I think that's I think the idea is there, and I think there's a lot of value in that, because that's always, the worry when you have like an institution where you have people who have so much knowledge over the years and accrue so much knowledge and probably strategies and ways to succeed within NOAA proper. Or any kind of governmental agency, and then when they retire, all that knowledge goes away. So it's great to be able to pass on that knowledge, pass on those tips to somebody who's younger, who's newer, who wants to have a similar career or even build on what you've done, or be able to access the same programs. Because I remember working for the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and you're always learning from people who have been there from for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and it was always great to talk to people there, and having a dedicated program, I can see a lot of value in there. So hopefully they keep building that program, right, and people they're able to participate in it, and it continues to build, because I think there's a lot of value in something like that. But I think it's good to be at a place where you can choose the work that you do, and be able to answer some of those long questions that you've had. What's the most present? If you were able to pick, any project in the world to do today, what would you choose?
That's a good question. I mean, I want to have, as I was telling Dave, a little fun. I want to go back out in the field and not see only virtual sharks on my computer screen. So go back to the good old days, so to speak. I like to do some of that, but I mean, if I really had the time and energy, there are a lot of unanswered things about, like with everything else, about shark research that need to be investigated. I mean, there's still a lot to do in every field. The fields that I know. I mean,
sure.
we don't know the abundance of many of the populations. We have a very small grip on natural mortality. There are so many things that so a lot of it is sort of desk work, right? Digging into data. But a lot of it too is things that need to be done, or better use of the data that exists. For example, as we all know, there are so many satellite telemetry studies, but you have to extend that, get all the juice you can from those studies, right? Can you estimate natural mortality from those studies? Because those parameters are extremely important, and it's what goes into stock assessments and what ultimately gives reliability to these studies, because a lot of these things are fixed. We spend a tremendous amount of energy on estimating other parameters, but what I call the big elephant in the room, it's something we just fix, and we know. Well, we don't really know, but we fix it and we tell ourselves we know it. So that's something that I don't know if I'll get to that point, but I'm sure somebody, I hope, will get into those fields in the future, into those.
Absolutely. Well, this has been terrific, Enrique. Kind of just before we go here, what advice would you have for a young person starting out? Undergrad, grad students thinking of going into the field. Do you have any words of wisdom you might share with us?
Yeah. It's so what I like to tell people is that even if you don't go into this field, because sometimes, and we've all experienced it to different degrees, right? Once you choose what you want to do it very well. Go for it all the way. I think that's very important, and I used to tell people so I was one big advocate of getting things more quantitative, right? So a lot of students got into those field, and now there are a lot of very good quantitative people, but to me it's good to have, it's like your investment portfolio, right? Have a well diversified portfolio of knowledge, because I'll give you an example for, and that's in my field, stock assessment, right? Stock assessment is, you need to know about a lot of different things because you're doing modeling, right? So you need to know how to code. You need, knowledge of mathematics, statistics, but you need to know the biology of the animals too, because otherwise, if you do it in a vacuum and you are not doing it within a team context with colleagues that know different pieces of the puzzle, you're in trouble. And also you need to know about the fisheries, right? So there are, so have a good diversified portfolio is my advice. That's what I tried to do in my career, and nobody's perfect at everything, and I believe more in a team approach, but sometimes you're not afforded that luxury, and they tell you to do one thing. But in general, for somebody, especially somebody who has not gone into the field, well, nowadays obviously you have to have a certain quantitative background, like everybody says, oh, you need to know R, for example, the big language. Yes, that's good. It helps, but
or GIS too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so and it will go more in that direction as everything goes, right? With machine learning and AI. But I think having a well diversified portfolio is a good thing, because then you have more opportunities rather than becoming super specialized at the outset.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Enrique. That was terrific advice, and I really can't thank you enough for coming on and joining us today and sharing your journey and your experiences and everything. And we wish you well in your retirement years, and you'll have to come back and tell us in a little while, maybe another year or two, a couple of years, how retirement's going for you. And we'll definitely look forward to that.
Will do. Thank you very much, guys. I had a really good time talking to you. And
absolutely.
I hope it was at least entertaining.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much, Enrique. We appreciate it.
Okay.